All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Piper. I'm an events coordinator and your host for tonight. Thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with us. So for those of you who are new to Spotlight PA, Spotlight PA is a nonpartisan nonprofit newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism. And of course, we couldn't do that without any of you, all of our readers and donors who support us in numerous ways. You can learn more about us at spotlightpa.org. So this event is the first of our book club pilot program titled Booklight PA. So Booklight PA is in partnership with a Novel Idea, which is a community-minded bookstore and event space based in Philly. You can learn more about a Novel Idea and purchase your book club books at anovelideaphilly.com. So before we get started, I do want to say a few housekeeping items. Today's event will be recorded and posted on our website shortly for those who cannot join us live. You can join our discussion by submitting questions during the event. You can do so at the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen here. We'll try to get to many of those as possible towards the end of our program, and thank you to those who are already submitted questions in advance. So tonight, we're joined by the amazing Jessamine Chan, the author of School for Good Mothers, a dystopian novel that follows a young mother forced into a government reform program where the custody of her child hangs in the balance. The School for Good Mothers made the New York Times bestseller list and was chosen as today's show book club pick, among so many other awards and recognitions. Not to mention, this book made me cry twice. So, Jasmine, thank you so much for joining us and being our first book club author. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I am honored to be your first book club pick. And thank you, Yasmin, and thank you, Spotlight PA, for the chance to speak to a PA audience. We moved back to my hometown of Oak Park, Illinois, from West Philly about 4 years ago, and we miss Philly so much.
Yeah, Philly's definitely unique. It's hard to leave. Um, so I do want to do a disclaimer. Tonight's events will have a little bit of spoilers.
Mhm.
I'll try to give a heads up before we get into the real nitty-gritty of the spoilers, but this book club is meant to discuss the contents of the book with the author after we read. So just want to give a heads up. So now let's get into our questions.
Sure.
So as you just said, you were born in Chicago and recently moved back, but you did live in Philly for a while. What made you choose Philly as the setting for this book?
Well, I started the book quite a long time ago now. So I started writing it in 2014. So actually I was born in Arizona kind of randomly. My parents are retired professors, so my dad's job was actually in Arizona, but I grew up in Chicago. I went to school on the East Coast. But I started writing the book in early 2014 when I was living in New York. And then when I picked the project back up in fall 2014, it was right after we'd moved from Brooklyn to South Philly.
Mhm.
And I think because I was writing at a time when I was learning a new city, um, I ended up like navigating the neighborhoods kind of along with Frida. And so it made sense at the time to set it in Philly, also because um, it felt like a place where people didn't necessarily have like a preconceived idea of like what a mom in Philly would be like. When I thought about setting it in Brooklyn, but I already had a mom who was like on page one gonna do a really, really bad thing. And it felt like having her be a Brooklyn mom, like an upper middle class Brooklyn mom who left her child at home, that was like too many strikes against her. Just
Yeah.
because I mean, when we think of like um a very privileged Brooklyn mom, you have an idea in your head of what that looks like. But I don't think I was going up with against the same like stereotypes by setting it in Philly. And also it was uh, it was not the easiest experience in terms of like going from the racial dynamics of Brooklyn to the racial dynamics that I experienced in South Philly. Because like at the time, 11 years ago, I was like one of the only Asians around. So it was something I thought about a lot. And like there was a sense of otherness that was um like particular to that point in time in that particular neighborhood. I think right now the neighborhood's probably very different. I think I lived in a particularly chilly block. So I think that kind of colored my experience of the new place.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also interesting to hear how much of yourself is actually in Frida, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Well, I will say it is definitely a work of fiction, but I feel like there's so much of the author in all of the characters. Like there's probably a lot of me in Susanna too.
Mm. So we briefly talked about over email and just before we started this, how you really put my girl, our main character Frida, through so much. She went through so much. What was some of the most difficult parts when you were writing this book?
Um, when I did a campus visit last week, and I ended up rereading the book because the funny thing is once you are working on something new, you kind of like forget book like I'm finally working on what I hope will be book two, but it has required me to like unlearn my first novel, and so I had to kind of teach myself the book again in order to speak to undergrads about it. And so when I reread it, I think I was a little shocked. Like I didn't quite remember how sad it is, how stressful it is. And it just made me reflect on what a wild time pregnancy and early motherhood is. And I feel like the book does capture like the rawness of that experience. So I think probably the very hardest part. So that your question was, was the hardest part to write?
Mhm.
Oh, so I think the very hardest part to write was chapter 18. And um, but I will say what was interesting about structuring the book was like there were entire subplots that were like abandoned. Like in so, okay, spoiler alert. One of the things that did change in the drafting is like I had written like whole chapters of Frida and Tucker getting together in the real world.
Mhm.
And then like Frida kind of like going off like on her like a self-destructive like streak for weeks and weeks and like just kind of wallowing in sorrow. And then I think one of the interesting things that I was experimenting with as I was editing was how much can you trust the reader to fill in what could be happening in the white space? Like,
Mhm.
can I just jump like from chapter 4 to chapter 5? Like, can I almost jump genres? Like where she goes from the courthouse to the bus ride to the school. Like there's all these events that I wrote out that I took out of the final draft because I feel like part of the relationship of reading is like the reader bringing their own imagination and filling in and doing some of that work. And so I wanted to really trust the reader to like bring their own imagination and understanding and to not have to over explain everything. But the deep sorrow of like the ending scenes were very hard to write. But it was also very, very hard to write the like all the secondary characters because I'd never worked on a project with such a huge cast before. So to
Mhm.
make all of the mothers distinct and memorable and nuanced and like three-dimensional and as real as Frida was its
Mhm.
own project.
Yeah, I would say you did a great job in giving every single character a voice and a plot in this book. Um, So this book was published in 2022, which wasn't too long ago. But after rereading it, did any of your original thoughts on the characters or how this book might be perceived in the world now change?
Um, I think at the time I started writing it in early 2014, it was more firmly a dystopian novel. Like
Mhm.
by the time it came out in early 2022, it became like an incredibly realistic novel with some dystopian and speculative elements because the world had become much more dystopian. And so one of the things that I was talking about when I was doing campus visit last week was like the intersections in some of the themes and elements in the book and our dystopian present. And so I was sort of just like looking at areas of overlap and so I couldn't have predicted where we would be in 2025. And I think the thing that I thought would come true, like I kind of felt like I was racing against time to get this book published before robots like this actually existed, like humanoid robots. But it turns out that the humanoid robots are still pretty far away just because the, I mean, the roboticists are still working on things like robots with feet that can walk and like moving hands and like the mechanics of a humanoid robot are are still like being sorted out. But And certainly there's not robots that like look so lifelike, but I think the thing that I couldn't have envisioned is how much AI would have advanced in the time from 2022 to now. And when I was reading back over some of the invented technology, I think it was scary to think, oh, the program could very easily surveil the moms and like do a deep dive on their whole lives just with AI. Like if you fed all the moms info like into AI, like they could look through like all the moms' social media history, all their emails, all their text messages. And so the surveillance part feels a lot more real than it did even when it was published. And
Yeah.
just our relationship with technology feels really different. But I mean, the book is, and we'll talk more about this. But I mean, the kernel of truth in the book is that there really is a like a family court system that the sociologist Dorothy Roberts refers to as a family policing system, and
Mhm.
and so that part has been true for many decades. So I was taking like that real program and trying to make it like a one size fits all government program with this added element of technology. But the surveillance piece and the government intrusion into private life, I think we're now in a different world in terms of like those two issues.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into technology and AI a little bit later. But that ties us into our next question, which talk about how you, what research you did in preparation for this book. So the way the school works almost kind of remind me of like a prison system more than a school system. So did you study any of those systems when you were creating this school specifically for good mothers?
Um, I didn't I didn't study carceral systems specifically. I mean, I was trying to write what I referred to over the years as something that would feel like 1984, but for moms. So it wasn't just about being confined by the government, but it was about indoctrination. And
Mhm.
so in terms of the research that I did, um, I read a lot about the family court system. The one thing that I wish I could go back and do is I wish I had known about Dorothy Roberts' work like back then. So that was like the one big hole in my understanding because it turns out she researches this exact topic. And it's been incredible to see our books like being placed in conversation, getting to do an event with her at the Juvenile Law Center in Philly, and like getting to meet her. But she writes about she looks at the history of the family policing system, and her stories are much more heartbreaking than any novel could ever, like the stories of the women she writes about are like much more heartbreaking than any novel could ever be. So I just wanted to add the caveat that someone like Frida, who's an upper middle class Chinese American woman, wouldn't come to the attention of Child Protective Services, like in real life. Like she just wouldn't be on anyone's radar because of her race and class privileges. So I'm primarily writing about a tragedy that happens to Black and Brown mothers who are poor. So I was trying to learn about the way the family court system has changed, and also to learn a little bit about the foster care system because I wasn't writing about, because I specifically chose not to write a story about the foster care system because I think that's a totally different book. And I think that maybe it's probably also not my story to tell, because I'm already writing like quite a bit beyond my lived experience because I haven't been impacted by the system and I don't have people close to me who have. So I was just trying to write from a place of empathy and curiosity. And so I was trying to learn about the stories of moms whose families had been impacted by the system, and also some of the history of law and psychology. And so I did a lot of reading. I wish I had had a chance to do interviews, but I think the thing when you're writing your first novel is you can't really put out a call like on social media or anything, or like email a bunch of people because I mean everyone's writing a novel. So I didn't really have access to people in terms of like first person accounts, but I did try to do a lot of research, and a lot of the research began with one of the articles that was a catalyst for the whole project, which is it's called "Where Is Your Mother" by the journalist Rachel Aviv, which appeared in the New Yorker in late 2013. So reading that story combined with like me having a lot of feelings about whether or not to have a child and feeling like really, really stressed out about the decision to have a child. I will say when I've done these book events and I talk about the maternal ambivalence and the stress about whether or not to have a baby, my daughter usually raises her hands in the audience, just like, look, 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 she had a baby and she's happy about it. So so I obviously like I am very happy to be a mom, but it was a hard decision.
Yeah.
And for two artists in your mid 30s, I mean the biological clock pressure is really really real. My husband would always bring up the melting of Greenland and talk about like how could you have a child when like the world is on fire, and I'm sure it's an even more fraught decision now, but some of the research that I did, the funny thing is a lot of the research that I did was while I was pregnant, because I wrote the whole first draft before I had a child. And then along the way, got pregnant with my daughter. And so I was doing all this research that was both like a little bit useful for life, but really useful for my books, because I was reading all the parenting manuals and these like deep dives into American parenting culture, and like most of the parenting and pregnancy guides were not at all helpful for my actual life, but they were really good for like understanding the world that I was satirizing. So I would get like a little bit of useful stuff, but like tons of inspiration for the novel itself.
How much of your research or process of writing this book was like research versus writing? Like how much of your time is your day did you research? How much of your time did you write?
So I will say I'm coming to novel writing from having been a short story writer first. So I'm someone who has to write the big, messy, blobby first draft. So I seem to have not learned a more efficient system, because I seem to be doing that all over again, where I like had my messy, messy first draft, and now I'm doing a period of like a lot of reading.
Mhm.
I'm not someone who can go from researching back to my draft. I
Yeah.
I've been telling my friends that like I'm taking this period of a couple months. So it and I did this with my first book too, where it's like I'm feeding books into the large language model of my own brain. And then like I'm just taking in all this like knowledge and ideas, and like at the moment I'm also doing interviews, and so you just have to hope that the large language model of one's own brain will put all these pieces together into art. And I'm not someone who was for my first book, I definitely wasn't trying to write a sociological study. Like it
Mhm.
was always going to be a novel told from this one mother's perspective, and it was going to always have these sci-fi speculative elements. So I wanted to get to the emotional truth of what it might feel like for a mom who's in going through this horrible ordeal. Like what might it feel like to try to hold on to her integrity, and also to try to hold on to her hope, when like the odds are really really stacked against her, and when the state is really trying to stamp out like all individuality and personality and free will.
Yeah.
So I could only try to like imagine my way into that perspective with like research, and also just trying to like watch films, like read magazine articles, read newspaper articles. And part of why I was interested in even writing about this topic is once I learned a little bit more about the system of family policing, I didn't understand why we weren't talking about it all the time. Like I felt so enraged. I didn't understand why I wasn't on the front page of the paper every day if this is impacting thousands of families every year. And so because you only see the cases on the front page when it's like when usually when a child has died. And
Mhm.
so and so those are the only cases you hear about, and but yet there's like so many others, and mistakes are being made, and those mistakes are leading to families being separated forever. So it was something that I wanted people to get outraged with me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of mistakes, let's go back to Frida. Um, so before she has her very bad day,
Mm.
and before she'd even told by officials, Frida already felt like she was kind of a bad mother. She was
Mhm.
recently divorced. She had already had limited time with her daughter, Harriet. and was overall just like feeling very unfulfilled with her life. And it's not really mentioned in the beginning of the book, but Frida is almost showing signs of postpartum depression at this time of the book and currently. Do you think postpartum depression is something that is talked about because it is so common?
Um, Wait, so the question is, do I think postpartum depression is talked about today?
Yes, or
Um,
more because it's so common.
I mean, it is very common, but what I have found in my personal life and in reading about this topic and in meeting a lot of moms in the last 3 years, which I've been very lucky to do, is there's so much shame and stigma around having any negative experiences during pregnancy, or as a mom. I mean, it's a time, especially during pregnancy, and early motherhood, it's very unsettling for people if you experience anything like anger, frustration, um, depression, like ambivalence. And in early motherhood, you're only supposed to experience joy. And so I really feel like there's a lot of women who are silently suffering. Um, and in terms of my own experience with depression, I've been thinking a lot about it because like I have a lot of like angry feelings about the very, very crazy suggestion that taking Tylenol causes autism, because it's taking a very big complicated problem and just kind of arbitrarily choosing a a solution just because they decided that in September that's when they're going to fix this problem that's been going on for decades, and so it's pinning all the blame on moms, and like it's just becomes a matter of individual choice when like that's totally not how this works. But I think it's on the continuum of how pregnant women are treated, and something that I really struggled with, was that I had been on antidepressants for many, many years. And the message that I got from my internist, who was a very well-intentioned person, was that no medicine is 100% safe if you're going to get pregnant. And so I went completely off my meds, and that really resulted in a lot of suffering and for no reason at all. And so that suffering was great material for the book, but terrible in life.
Yeah.
It was an attitude that I kept coming across. And when I did end up going back on antidepressants, and like one that like didn't even work because that was what was allowed for pregnant women, I did get the like pretty direct questions from people who did not know me. Like, is it safe for you to be on that? Is it safe for you to be breastfeeding while taking antidepressants? So I think there's a degree to which being pregnant and having a baby makes it like the world feel like they have claim to you, and to your like very private health decisions. But I think there just is a lot of shaming of pregnant women and moms. Um, and there's like a lot of shaming, a lot of social control. So I feel like there are a lot of women going through postpartum depression, but even though it's talked about now, I think there's still a lot of educating to be done. And I mean, I worry a lot about like the current administration and what decisions they might make about, like they've already talked about antidepressant use. And so given the policies that have already been made toward women and like the potential suffering that could be caused in terms of interfering with a woman's decisions that should only be happening between her and her doctor, I worry what will happen to the discussion around mental health.
So something else I really thought was interesting was the dynamic between Frida and her parents.
Mm,
So she had their financial support and was overall seemed like they were um, active in her life, at least on the surface.
mhm.
Yet Frida still felt like she couldn't share certain parts of herself with her family and wasn't really living up to their expectations. So how did Chinese or Asian culture kind of play into how Frida felt during this time?
Well, I have a funny anecdote about this because I ended up doing a book event in my hometown, like back in Oak Park here. And so A lot of the people who came like knew me since I was like a child, like families that I had babysat for, and like some of my parents' friends who'd known me since I was 3 or 4. And like one of my parents' friends raised her hand and said, "Why didn't Frida's parents help her the way your parents helped you?" And I said, "I can't do that because there'd be no plot to this book. Like my parents have supported me in every way. Like they've been my champions with this novel, with starting a family. I mean, they're like power grandparents here. And so you kind of like, I can't write that into a book because there would be like no conflict then.
Mhm.
So like Frida has a much more like fraught relationship with her parents, but I think in my Chinese family and in a lot of Asian families I've seen, there is a lot that goes unspoken. Um, and it isn't from the experience of like other first generation kids that I've met, it's not a very talky, huggy, affectionate, like post therapy kind of culture. You're really dealing with like two very, very different models of parent child relationships. And certainly the very modern, like hands-on, involved style of parenting is like totally different than like the way East Asian parents would like raise their kids, because it like that is a model of like you just obey the adults. There isn't the like how do you feel like kind of way of parenting. So I wanted to explore like that conflict, but also I wanted part of the judgment of the state in terms of judging Frida as not being good enough, was like part of the original inspiration from the Rachel Vive article I mentioned. Was it was about a mom who I think she's Middle Eastern, and she like part of the struggle was that she felt that she was being judged by a very American set of parenting standards,
Mhm.
like by American set of standards about like what does maternal instinct look like? What does affection look like? How are you supposed to talk to your child? So I wanted a very white upper middle class, a very, very American set of parenting standards to be the standards for the school. So Frida and all the moms of color, and also the white moms too, they're bringing their own like cultural and social baggage to those set of standards. But I think there is just generally in American culture, there's not enough of a question of like who's doing the judging and like whose standards these are. And that's something that I wanted to put forth with the book.
Yeah, and I love that that was mentioned when Frida was in the school, how she was being judged by these American standards. And she brought that up too. So again, there were mentions of American culture of parenting versus the Asian culture of parenting. Can you talk about some of the differences and similarities between the two? And was Frida, since she was, a Chinese American, was she kind of stuck in between the two?
Well, it was a tough choice in the sense to make Frida Chinese American, because like the phenomena I'm writing about does not really happen to moms like Frida. So I had to create a system where it'd be possible to like see through Frida's eyes. But one of the things that was interesting to me about this project was I really wanted to write a Chinese American heroine who was a mess, who got to be as messy on page one as any white man, as any like cisgender hetero white man gets to be in any novel that you could pick up in the
Hmm.
store. Like we don't question if a white male character on page one is a mess in like 10 different ways. Like he's just sympathetic. Like that's like there's no psychological roadblock toward getting on his side. And so I wanted to give myself permission to write a really messy Asian American heroine, like the kind of character I wanted to see on the page, who got to do all the messy, selfish, contradictory things. And I think the the way that I used Frida's racial perspective in the book is I wanted Frida to be the ultimate outsider, not just because of race, but because of class, and for her to like navigate the different groups of moms and like to have to like confront the racial tensions in the book, and like look at like her own privilege, and also look at the way that the other moms like didn't necessarily get where she was coming from either. So it was something that was like very, so like writing the racial dynamics in the book was also probably very, very tricky. But also it was a matter of like trial and error. And I really wanted all the moms of color, and all the moms in general to all be flawed, like to not just have Frida be a mess, but have all of the moms be a mess. Because I think the thing that I struggle with sometimes with characters of color in contemporary fiction is the noble friend who has like sort of a like educating the white reader role. And I wanted to make sure that none of the moms were falling into that trap as I was writing them. But in terms of differences between the Chinese parenting model and the American parenting model, I mean, some of it comes down to like expressions of affection, and the way like the constant like I love you, you can do it, like way of talking in American parenting culture is like this is like not something that was ingrained in me. Like
Mhm.
affection is just like expressed in very different ways. I mean, my parents are very like huggy and affectionate now, but that's like Chinese culture, from my experience of it, it's just not demonstrative in that way. But American culture really expects that of you. So I wanted Frida to like run up against that in the way that the school was training her.
Oh, yeah. And we'll definitely talk about more of the race and ethnicity dynamics between, because Frida kind of like really like floated through a lot of the groups. And it was interesting to see how different groups like kind of responded to her. So we'll definitely get into that. But something that really stood out to me was, of course, the mantras that the mothers and fathers were made to repeat. So for the mothers, it was, I'm a narcissist, I'm a danger to my child. But for the fathers, it was, I'm a father learning to be a better, or I'm learning to be a better father. A father learning
Oh,
to
oh
be,
no, I think it's I am a father
learning to be a better
who
man.
is learning to be a better man.
Yes. So, and again, even in the mother's training, it was so many like deterrence and fear and punishment and like negative self-talk to make them learn. But it didn't seem like the fathers had that way at all. So, why did you structure it this way specifically?
I mean, the mantras were a way to have fun, in a fairly dark project, and a way to inject
So fun.
some like dark humor into the project. And I will give credit where credit is due. My friend Keith S. Wilson, who's an award-winning poet who has a new book out. He was my tech advisor, and he was the one who came up with the mantra for the fathers, because he said there's no way that the fathers would have the same program. Like there can't be as many fathers. Everything has to be easier for them. Um, and their mantra can't be about shame,
Yeah.
because like that's just not the way the world is set up. And I mean, I will say my husband has always done more than half of the childcare, and has like done like above and beyond what a modern father is expected to do. But the way the world has responded to him is something that I definitely was taking note of. I mean, when I walked down the street in Philadelphia with our baby in a carriage, like sometimes people came to like tell me I had a cute baby and stuff. But when he walked down the street, he would get these nods of approval, like just from everyone, like, good for you, man. Like the side they weren't saying that, but it was just like, yeah, yeah, look at you taking care of your child, like that kind of vibe, like
Yeah.
just by appearing in public with a baby. And it felt like it felt like the world was shining their like glow of approval on him by just him stepping out the door with a child by himself. Um, and and I mean, everyone was just always amazed whenever he did anything. And it's
Yeah.
not to say that he's not a great dad. It's just like the expectations are so different. And so I wanted the actual program and the mantra and the punishments that the dads had to go through just reflect the way that the standards are totally different for men and women.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we see on social media when we have the dads doing their daughter's hair or something, it's like 1 million likes or something. But for mothers, it's like you're supposed to be doing that. That's what you do every single morning. So I see that. So again, I want to talk about race and ethnicity for a bit. So once we're there in the school, we kind of see how everyone of their same race kind of like naturally gravitated towards everyone. And it reminds me of that book, Why Are All the Black Kids Singing Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Tatum, which talks about how people kind of like we naturally like self-segregate. But for Frida, there was no Asian or even Chinese American people in their program at all. So when this happened, sometimes Frida felt a type of way when she was seen by like white people or whatever it was. How do you think this impacted the way people like CPS, the judges, the counselors saw her versus how the other mothers saw her?
Um, I mean, I didn't want Frida to just not have to deal with her race at all. I mean, I think I wanted her to have to deal with the the racial gauntlet of being Asian in real life. I mean, I think Kathy Park Hong's book Minor Feelings captures it better than I ever could, in terms of talking about both the hyper visibility and invisibility of being East Asian. Um, and so I wanted Frida to be called out by her roommate, by her friends, for the advantages that she had, that the school did group her with the white mothers. I mean, because she is light skinned, and I mean the school is primarily black and brown mothers. And also for her to also experience racism along the way too. And so I wanted Frida to have to look at her own blind spots as a result. And I wanted to like lean on that a little bit. But in terms of the way that CPS and the judges viewed her, I did want them to give her a hard time by saying like you've had every advantage in life and you still messed up. And so I did want to like put her in that very particular like child of academics class where she has been given like all the education, like family support. She's not dealing with poverty. Like there's always like even though she's struggling with money, she has a safety net and she
Mhm.
still messed up. So I wanted her to not have things handed to her on a platter, and then also to have the judges like look down on her even more because of her class. Like in real life, I think her class advantages would probably get her like a great lawyer and get her out of this system. But I wanted it to be like a much harsher system than exists currently.
Yeah. Okay, we have 20 minutes left here. I have a few more questions, but after this, we're going to get into audience questions. So if you have a question, please put that in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to them at the end of the program. So as I said before, we're going to talk about a little bit about technology and AI. So in this book, it almost seemed like they really stripped the humanity and human out of the mothers and just made it all about like a science in this book. On top of that, Frida and most of the other mothers were watched constantly. I mean, we started out with the cameras and there's the guards and even the judgment of the other mothers. In a world where we're seeing a growing use of AI, social media, and even like family bloggers, how
Mm.
do you think these things change the way we see parenting and how we just parent in general?
I think it gives us a really distorted view of the parent-child relationship, and
Mhm.
also really distorts our sense of privacy. I mean, it's something that I have struggled with in my just personal life. Like once I had a public Instagram page and I had a book to promote and an author page to like keep like pumping out content. And I did get requests about this, to have photos with me and my daughter, and my husband put up his foot down and said like no photos with her face showing on any public Instagram or like magazines or TV or anything. And my daughter like totally wants to be on TV and in magazines, but we made a decision to just protect her privacy. And I think the privacy component, like for the kids' sake, is something that's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But in terms of surveillance and our own use of technology, I feel like it's kind of like a not double speak, but it's kind of like you're like have your own role, but then you're also performing it, and that's something that I think about a lot. And I mean, I have not ventured into the world of like parenting blogs. I made when we needed information from parenting blogs, I made my husband read them, and then he came back and would tell me these moms are really mean to each other. They are just crazy. They're just yelling at each other for like pages and pages. And I think the anonymity of the internet and like the speed also allows for like a crazy amount of like judgment and strife. And so I think in an ideal world, and there are pockets of the internet that allow for this, there is community.
Mhm.
But I think we are living in a very challenging time. And so I think that it can also be just really the use of technology and surveillance and like how it affects parenting. It can make a already very lonely experience quite isolating.
Yeah, I agree. So this is gonna be our last question, and it's a big one.
I
So,
say thank you for all your thoughtful questions, by the way.
of course, thank you. And again, I'm gonna thank you so much for being here, and you're our first book club author. It really, really, really means a lot. So the big question, because we need to know, for you, what makes a good mother?
So I'm going to turn this back to you and say, I think that this definition is different for everyone. For me personally, um, I mean, it's certainly like whether or not I feel like I've done a good job changes like by the hour. I mean, I personally am trying to be as present as possible and to make my child feel loved and safe and try to create uh, a life, a childhood for her where she can be loved and safe and
Mhm.
thrive and just enjoy being a child. And part of that has meant like not informing her about like every single thing that's going wrong in the world and like giving her space to enjoy playing on the monkey bars and learning piano and like having like preserving that innocence a little longer. But in terms of like what makes a good mother, I really think it depends on circumstances and culture and family history and like a million other things that there isn't one universal definition. And I really hope readers will leave like questioning whether or not there can be like one universal definition.
I mean, I'm gonna speak as a reader. I would definitely say there were so many different types of mothers in this, so many different types of cultures in this. There's no way to just, there's no monolith for what a good mother is. So with that, we're going to turn into audience questions. Again, if you have a question, please put that in the Q&A section at the chat, or at the bottom of your screen. We're going to get into some that were already pre-submitted. So this one comes from Lynn E. She said, "Is this really the reality or future for women in America?"
I certainly hope not. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that there are thousands of families in communities across America who are going through a Kafkaesque nightmare with the family court system. And it's not the case that mothers are rounded up and sent to an institution, but I mean the real life nightmare is probably quite a bit more harrowing than any novel could capture. So I don't think this is the future necessarily, but there are some aspects of the book that we're like that are reflective of the present and are reflective of the last many decades. I think the part that does feel very plausible is the government control of women's lives. I mean, my book had been out for about 6 months when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and I certainly have uh, been very honored to be part of the conversations about a post-Roe world. But I mean, I think I had my blinders on regarding abortion rights, and it's something I really took for granted. I
Mhm.
never thought I would be raising my daughter in a world where she has far less freedoms than my generation did. And so I think we are going backwards and like backwards like 100 years in a really terrifying way. And I think the part that does feel very plausible is like the social control and the desire for the government to like control all aspects of women's lives. and also where we are culturally, where it's it's the case that like moms are exalted and put on a pedestal, and somehow the government wants women to be having more babies, but yet there's no social safety net for them, and there's no like universal access to childcare, and like who knows what's going to happen with health insurance. And so women are supposed to just have all these babies, but like who is going to take care of them? How are they going to survive? And there's just so many like systemic problems that are just sort of it's just sort of handed back to the individual to like solve the mess that we've been given.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Like, for this is the reality for some women. And when I was reading about when Frida mentioned, her very bad day, what it reminded me of, there was a woman, I don't remember what it was, but she had a job interview and couldn't find babysitting, so she had to leave her kids in the car and was still like ostracized for that. I don't know if she got her kids taken away or how, like the extremities of it,
Yeah.
but it just reminded me of, again, this is the reality for some women right now. So I love your book, and I think it's very, even though it was written in 2022, it's still very timely. Um, so, oh, Roberta D wants to ask about your writing process. Do you write daily? Do you write on paper? How do you write?
So I do not write daily. I have some periods of intense work, but I did generally write daily for book one. But as my child grew older, our previous system of like taking turns in the weekends, where my husband would take care of her in the morning so that I could write, and then I take care of her in the afternoons. Everyone told us like that's not going to work forever because the family needs to spend time together. And so in the interest of our family spending time together, I had to give up my like trying to write 7 days a week plan. I also had to just learn to be much more adaptable, because once you are the parent of a slightly older child and there's a lot of school days off, and like someone gets sick, there's just a lot of interruptions. So I've had to be a little less precious with my writing routine. But I do write longhand, and I highly recommend it. Especially if anyone who's listening is having trouble with concentrating, with trying to stay offline, with feelings of perfectionism. For me, writing longhand allows me to really tap into the childlike joy of making art, and which is, I mean, I didn't actually write fiction as a child. I didn't start writing until college, but it allows me to tap into the feeling I had when I was first writing fiction in college of, wow, this is the most amazing thing I could be doing with my life. Because writing is so hard. And like now that I'm in a new project, I can confirm a second book is not actually any easier. Don't listen to the people who say it is. And you kind of have to just recommit to the project, especially if it's a novel. You have to just recommit all the time. And for me, writing by hand and working on my drafts like in printouts and like scribbling on the pages is a way of like silencing like the judgment and pressure that I feel sometimes as I work.
Yeah, I love writing longhand. There's something just so freeing about it. It doesn't feel like very like permanent when you're writing on your laptop. It's also like shuts out a lot of the noise. So I love that process. Um, so Jessica W asks, what advice would you give to a young writer of color?
Hmm. I mean, the world of young writers of color is very different than when I was growing up. I mean, I just turned 47 in August, and I mean, when I was growing up, I besides Amy Tan and Maxine Hong Kingston, who are like icons, I didn't necessarily see people who looked like me doing what I wanted to do. So, in some sense, I think the world is much more open for artists of color, but for young writers of color, I think it's important to find a community. It's important to read widely, and also, I mean, to to try to like immerse yourself in contemporary literature, and like sort of, and also to see where the gaps are. I mean, for me, I was interested in writing, so my relationship to like where I wanted this book to sit in Asian American literature, what and so this is sort of a roundabout way of answering the question. Um, I wanted Frida's Chinese identity to be one part of the story, not necessarily the whole story. Like this is not necessarily the book that people would have expected from me as a first book. Like it's not a traditional first novel. Um, and I wanted it to push the possibilities of Asian American literature forward by having like the that Frida be quite such a mess and like to be an anti-heroine in that way. And then also to have her Asian identity not be the driving force of the story. Like that's woven in,
Hmm.
but the story is about something bigger. So I think there's a lot more room for weird art by artists of color now than ever before. So I would say like give yourself permission to push the envelope, but also to kind of understand what the path that's been laid.
Do you have any specific advice on how, again, young writers of color can navigate the publishing world? Because it's still, even if you write something that you connect with and you feel it's very, your greatest work, but publishing might not see it that way. What advice do you have on how to navigate that?
I will say I've had a very charmed experience with my publishing journey. So like mine was not the typical experience. I mean, I also should note that I knew a lot about publishing going into it because I went to school in New York and I worked at Publishers Weekly, so I knew quite a lot about how a book gets made and promoted. In terms of navigating it, I mean, it again finding a writing community and like trying to educate yourself about it. And in terms of navigating, I would also add it's okay to be a private person, and it's okay to be a private person and nurture your art during the long years of just trying to develop as a writer, like before the book is published. I think um I've seen a lot of advice online about building a platform and like having a certain amount of followers and making yourself a brand as part of your career, and that is great. And I know that that works for some people, but for me, my journey to my first book was a very long, bumpy one. And a lot of the long, bumpy time just happened off the internet because I just was not a public person on the internet. I didn't publish a lot online, and it's okay to just have been learning and growing as an artist during that time. So I think there's a lot of like learning about publishing, but when your book is ready, that's a whole different part of your brain that gets activated. And it's okay to just focus on the making the art right now because there will be people who will educate you and help you with the business side of it. So I think there's like phase one of the book, which is like the actual making of the art, and the phase two is like the business and marketing. And that's just a whole different process. And like there's writing conferences, in terms of gathering info, there's resources like Poets and Writers magazine. I mean, I'm sure Instagram is like full of useful advice that wasn't available to me when I was starting out.
Mhm.
But I would say it's also important to like have the like nurturing quiet part of the experience too.
Yeah. Focus on making the art. I love that saying. I'm gonna start saying that.
Well, I mean, there's the marketing is going to go on forever. And so the marketing and the art making are just completely different experiences.
Mhm.
I think the world is going to tell you like you need to sell it sooner, you need to publish it sooner, you need to have the biggest audience possible. All of those things are great, but I think that can really interfere with the art making, especially for young artists.
Yeah. And I feel like in this day and age, you're so focused on the marketing of it while you're actually writing. You don't get to focus on the art. So again, I really love that. So this
Well,
question comes from, oh, sorry, would you want to say something?
oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, these are really difficult times. It's important to hang on to the joy and the pleasure of making art because the world is not gonna make it easier for you. So, I mean, it's important to like to nurture that like private, like secret part of your brain and heart that wants to write a book.
Yeah. Speaking of being creative, I just started like coloring all the time. It's one of my favorite things. I feel like a kid, but again, you need something to be something daily to be like creative and just get that stress out. So I highly recommend anyone listening to start coloring. So this question comes from Rachel M, and she says, "How can we as a society better support mothers who are struggling?"
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of things we as a society could do. I don't know that those things are going to happen during this particular time that we're living in. I mean, I would love to see a world with universal health care and with access to affordable, high quality childcare. That would change all sorts of things. I mean, my novel and a whole bunch of other novels would just the whole plot would be eliminated if the moms had access to affordable childcare. I mean, that just would like the books just wouldn't exist. But we do not live in that world. I think there could be a lot better understanding of maternal mental health. And in terms of supporting mothers, I mean, I think a lot of what's going on now with intrusions into like very personal family decisions, like gender affirming care, like that is a way that we're not supporting mothers, like telling them what they're like the studies about autism that are based on nonsense, also not supporting mothers. I think a world where we follow the science and like we're back to like supporting facts and like that we're I mean, I feel like right now there's just two completely different versions of reality happening, and I worry about the moms who are believing the alternate theories that are being put forth by, unfortunately, the people who have the most power in this country. Um, I also think a lot of the issues that I'm writing about are for a lot of the moms in real life who are affected by the family policing system are issues of poverty. And so in terms of like income inequality and homelessness, I mean, there's so much to be done and like so many ways in which like mothers, children, young families can be supported, but I don't know that I see that happening in the next 3 years. I just hope that there will be an alternate vision put forth so that the ship can be righted.
Mhm. So I do not see any questions here. That was our last question. Is there anything else you want to mention now that we have you here?
Oh, I just want to encourage everyone to like take care of themselves and find ways to find joy and connection. September feels like it's been going on for 6 years, and so I think it's important for us to all like connect with our loved ones and like engage with the world and what we believe in and care about and like find ways to like nurture ourselves.
Yes, agree. Community is so important, but also very much take care of yourself. So with that, I want to thank you again, Jasmine, for joining us. It's been so lovely to have you, and I'm not going to thank you enough for being our first book club author. And thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with us. You can find more of Jasmine's book wherever you buy books or at her website, jasminechan.com. As always, I encourage you to buy local and support your local libraries. So next up, we are reading Saturnalia by Stephanie Feldman, an amazing, another dystopian fantasy novel that we're going to read. We'll have the discussion with Stephanie on October 23rd at 6 p.m. You can register for that event now and find more of our events at spotlightpa.org/events. Um, and we also have a great list of books that Jasmine shared with us that is available on our site right now. Hopefully, my editor is going to drop that in the chat. Um, but yeah, if not, you can go to spotlightpa.events and find that. And again, thank you, Jasmine, so much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reading and have a wonderful fall.
Yes, happy fall.
Take,
Bye.
bye.